Any of
Shirley
us little
Temple is remembered by
three to
millions as the
4-year-olds
smiling little girl who
weren't
danced,
disciplined.
sang, and
I mean,
brought
weren't
happiness to the world
obedient.
during
They
one of
put
the
us in the
darkest
black
periods in
box with
American
the ice.
history. At a time when families were struggling to survive the Great Depression, her bright face and cheerful voice became symbols of hope. People saw her movies and felt, even for a short while, that life could be joyful again. But behind that famous smile was a childhood very different from what audiences imagined. While Shirley Temple earned millions of dollars and became the most famous child star Hollywood had ever seen, her life was shaped by long working hours, extreme pressure, and decisions made by adults who controlled every part of her world. Years later, after her career had ended and after she became a mother herself, the truth about her childhood slowly came into the open, revealing a story that was far more complicated and painful than her films ever showed. Shirley Temple was born on April 23, 1928, in Santa Monica, California. She came into the world just before the Great Depression began, a time when banks were failing, jobs were disappearing, and families were losing everything they owned. Her parents, George and Gertrude Temple, were ordinary people living a modest life. George worked at a bank, and Gertrude stayed at home, taking care of the house. No one could have predicted that their daughter would soon become one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood. At first, Shirley seemed like a normal baby, but even at a very young age, she showed unusual abilities. By the time she was 6 months old, she could copy her father's whistle perfectly. When she was only 2 years old, she amazed visitors by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance backward. These early signs made it clear that Shirley had an exceptional memory and a natural sense of rhythm. Her mother quickly noticed Shirley's love for music and movement. Gertrude played records at home and encouraged her daughter to sing and dance along. Shirley did not need much instruction. She could hear a song once and repeat it almost perfectly. One day, while at a picnic on the beach, Shirley began tap dancing on the sand, copying a routine she had seen in a movie theater just days earlier. People watching were stunned. For Shirley, this moment was important because it was the first time she felt the excitement of performing for others. That feeling stayed with her for the rest of her life. Soon after, her mother enrolled her in a famous dance school in Santa Monica that trained young children for the movie industry. Shirley stood out immediately. She learned complex dance steps in minutes, while other students needed weeks. Teachers saw her talent and moved her into advanced classes. Even though she was much younger than the other students by the time Shirley was 3 years old, her life had already begun to revolve around performance and discipline. She practiced tap dance, ballet, and singing almost every day. What looked like fun to outsiders was actually the beginning of a demanding routine. Talent scouts regularly visited the dance school, searching for children who could be used in films. In 1931, Shirley caught the attention of a casting director who offered her a role in a series of short films known as the Baby Burlesques. These films featured very young children acting out adult situations, often in ways that would later be seen as deeply inappropriate. At the time, however, Hollywood did not question such practices. Shirley was paid only $10 a day, and rehearsals were unpaid. Even worse, the children were often punished harshly if they did not behave, including being locked in a freezing room. Though Shirley later said she tried to stay cheerful, these early experiences showed how little protection child actors had. From the outside, Shirley Temple's life looked magical. But behind the scenes, the foundation of her fame was built on long hours, strict control, and a childhood that was slowly being taken away from her as Shirley Temple moved from short films into major Hollywood productions. Her life changed at a speed that no child could fully understand. In 1933, when she was only 5 years old, a songwriter from Fox Studios noticed her dancing in a movie theater lobby. He was struck by her energy, confidence, and natural charm. That brief moment led to an audition for the film Stand Up and Cheer. Shirley had never acted in a full-length movie before, but she did not seem nervous. Cameras, lights, and adults giving instructions already felt normal to her. Her performance was small, yet unforgettable. One scene in which she danced and smiled with effortless joy captured the attention of audiences. When the film was released in 1934, it became a success, and Shirley Temple suddenly became the heart of Hollywood's hope during the Great Depression. Moviegoers did not just enjoy her performances. They depended on them emotionally. In hard times, Shirley's films made people believe that happiness was still possible. Fox Studios quickly realized what they had discovered. Shirley was signed to a contract paying her $150 a week, an enormous amount for a child at that time. More importantly, the studio began building entire movies around her personality. Films like Baby Take a Bow and Bright Eyes turned her into a household name. In Bright Eyes, Shirley sang On the Good Ship Lollipop, a cheerful song that became her signature. The song was so popular that hundreds of thousands of copies of the sheet music were sold. Shirley was only 6 years old, yet her face and voice were everywhere. In 1935, she received a Special Academy Award, a small statue made just for her. She became the youngest person ever to receive such an honor. During the long ceremony, she famously turned to her mother and asked if they could go home, reminding everyone that despite her fame, she was still a child. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure was growing. Shirley was no longer just a talented little girl. She was a financial lifeline for an entire studio. Her films made millions of dollars at a time when movie tickets cost only a few cents. From 1935 to 1938, Shirley was the biggest star in Hollywood, even earning more than famous adult actors like Clark Gable and Joan Crawford. She starred in multiple films every year, often without breaks. In 1 year alone, she appeared in 10 movies. Her workdays were long, sometimes lasting 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week. While other children went to school or played with friends, Shirley memorized lines, practiced dance routines, and performed under hot studio lights. Her mother remained closely involved in her career, carefully managing her appearance and behavior. Shirley's famous curls were not natural. They were created every night using rollers and special treatments that often caused discomfort. Her mother made sure she always looked perfect, even when she was exhausted or in pain. Shirley learned very early that mistakes were not allowed. She was expected to smile, behave politely, and perform flawlessly at all times. If she was tired, she was told to push through it. If she was sick, she was expected to continue working. Hollywood had no patience for weakness, especially from the child who was saving the studio from financial ruin. The physical toll on Shirley's young body was severe. She spent hours practicing tap dances, sometimes on hard surfaces like stairs, until her feet bled. Still, she was told to keep smiling. Injuries were ignored, and medical recovery was rushed. On one occasion, after undergoing ear surgery, she was sent back to work the very next day. Education was treated as unimportant. Shirley received only limited schooling on set, often during short breaks between scenes. This lack of proper education would later make it difficult for her to adjust to normal life when her career slowed down. At the time, however, no one seemed concerned. The industry cared only about the next film, the next performance, and the next profit to the public. Shirley Temple was the happiest child in the world. Her movies were filled with laughter, optimism, and cheerful songs. Parents trusted her image, and children adored her. But the reality of her daily life was far from joyful. She lived under constant supervision, strict rules, and unrelenting expectations. Her childhood was carefully managed, controlled, and shaped by adults whose primary concern was success. While Shirley did her best to remain positive, the cost of that success was a child who had spent working instead of growing, performing instead of learning, and pleasing others instead of discovering who she truly was. A.S. Shirley Temple's fame reached levels few stars had ever known. Strange and troubling stories began to surround her. The public obsession with her image grew so intense that people no longer saw her as a real child, but as a symbol that could be analyzed, questioned, and even doubted. One of the most disturbing rumors claimed that Shirley was not a child at all, but a fully grown woman pretending to be young. Some people believed she was in her 30s and had dwarfism, pointing to her confident behavior, strong posture, and perfect teeth as evidence. These rumors spread widely in Europe and became so extreme that critics and journalists openly debated her age. The fact that adults seriously questioned whether a 6-year-old girl was actually an adult showed how unnatural her fame had become. Shirley later explained that her teeth appeared perfect because she wore caps, a common practice for child actors who lost baby teeth on camera. Still, the damage was done. Her childhood had become public property, and even her identity was no longer her own. The pressure of being constantly observed took a deep emotional toll. Shirley was expected to behave like a professional adult while still being treated as a child with no control over her life. She was surrounded by adults who made decisions for her and benefited from her success. Despite earning enormous amounts of money, Shirley had no understanding of finances. She did not know how much she earned or where the money went. Her father managed her income, and like many parents of child stars during that era, he treated it as family money. Laws existed that were meant to protect child actors, requiring their earnings to be placed in trust accounts. However, these rules were often ignored and enforcement was weak. Shirley trusted her parents completely and never questioned their decisions. She believed her hard work would one day allow her to live comfortably as an adult. As she grew older, the reality of Hollywood became even darker. Shirley later revealed that during her teenage years, she experienced serious mistreatment from powerful men in the industry. One incident involved a well-known producer who exposed himself to her during a meeting. Another producer later attempted to assault her. These experiences showed how unsafe Hollywood could be for young performers, especially those whose fame made them valuable but also vulnerable. At the time, there were no proper systems in place to protect child actors from abuse. Speaking out was nearly impossible, and victims were often ignored or silenced. Shirley carried these experiences quietly for many years, focusing instead on surviving and continuing her work. By the time Shirley reached her early teens, her popularity began to fade. Audiences who once adored her struggled to accept her as anything other than the cheerful little girl with curls. The roles offered to her became fewer and less successful. When she tried to transition into more mature characters, the public response was mixed. Even when she delivered strong performances, viewers could not separate her from the image they had loved as children. This made her career increasingly frustrating. She worked hard, but the industry that had built her up now seemed unsure of what to do with her. The same system that had profited from her childhood no longer knew how to support her growth into adulthood. At the age of 22, Shirley finally gained access to her financial records. What she discovered was devastating. Of the $3 million she had earned during her childhood, only $44,000 remained. Nearly all of her fortune was gone. The money had been spent on luxury items, expensive lifestyles, and failed investments. Shirley had retired from acting believing she was financially secure, only to learn that she was almost broke. This moment marked a turning point in her life. It was a painful realization that the success she had worked so hard for had not truly belonged to her. Yet, what happened next surprised many people. Shirley chose not to respond with anger or revenge. She forgave her father and decided not to take legal action. In her autobiography, she wrote that she felt no bitterness, only acceptance. She believed that holding on to resentment would only cause more harm. This decision reflected Shirley's deep sense of resilience. After years of being controlled by others, she made a conscious choice to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past. Leaving acting was not just a career decision. It was an emotional necessity. She needed to rebuild her identity, not as a child star, but as a woman with her own values and goals. Though her childhood had been shaped by exploitation, pressure, and loss, Shirley Temple was determined to define the rest of her life on her own terms. After stepping away from Hollywood, Shirley Temple faced the challenge of building a life that had nothing to do with cameras, studios, or public expectations. For the first time, she was free from the demanding schedules and constant pressure that had defined her childhood. In 1950, her life took a new and important turn when she met Charles Alden Black, a successful businessman, at a party in Hawaii. Their meeting almost did not happen, as Charles had considered skipping the event to go surfing instead. Despite this near miss, they connected immediately. Their relationship grew quickly, and they married the same year. Unlike the many temporary relationships common in Hollywood, their marriage became a source of stability and support that lasted for 55 years. For Shirley, who had spent her early life surrounded by adults who viewed her as a product rather than a person, this steady partnership was deeply healing. Marriage allowed Shirley to step into a role she had never fully experienced before, living a private life. She became a mother to 3 children and focused on creating a home filled with warmth and normalcy. Raising her children was important to her, perhaps because she wanted to give them the childhood she never truly had. During these years, Shirley lived largely out of the public eye, choosing to prioritize her family over fame. However, stepping away from the spotlight did not erase her desire to contribute meaningfully to the world. As her children grew older, she began to feel a pull toward public service, a field that would allow her to use her intelligence, discipline, and communication skills in a new way. In the late 1960s, Shirley surprised many people by entering politics. In 1967, at the age of 39, she ran for Congress in California. Although she did not win the election, her strong performance showed that she was taken seriously as a candidate. This experience opened new doors for her. 2 years later, a chance conversation at a party changed her life once again. Henry Kissinger, a powerful government official, overheard Shirley discussing a complex issue related to Southwest Africa, now known as Namibia. Impressed by her knowledge and insight, he recognized her potential as a diplomat. Soon after, President Richard Nixon appointed her as a representative to the United Nations. This role marked the beginning of a remarkable second career, the United Nations. Shirley worked on issues that reflected her deep concern for human dignity. She advocated for refugees, environmental protection, and the rights of older people. Those who worked with her were often surprised by her seriousness and dedication. Many initially underestimated her, assuming she relied only on her fame. However, Shirley proved that she was well prepared and deeply committed to her responsibilities. In 1974, President Gerald Ford appointed her as a United States ambassador to Ghana. This made her one of the first women to hold such a high diplomatic position. During her time in Ghana, she earned respect through hard work, careful listening, and thoughtful leadership. Her most historically significant role came in 1989, when President George H.W. Bush appointed her as ambassador to Czechoslovakia. This was a crucial moment in world history, as communism was beginning to collapse in Eastern Europe. Shirley had a personal connection to the country, having been present in Prague during the Soviet invasion of 1968. Now, she returned as a diplomat during the Velvet Revolution, which peacefully ended communist rule. Shirley openly supported democratic reform and worked closely with the new leadership, including future President Václav Havel. Her presence during this period symbolized hope and transition, much like her films had decades earlier. Balancing her public duties with family life was not always easy. Diplomatic work required long period away from home, and Shirley often struggled with the emotional cost of separation. However, her husband remained supportive, and her family adapted to her changing role. Shirley once joked that her fame as a child actress helped open doors, but she knew that respect had to be earned through action. She took her responsibilities seriously and approached diplomacy with the same discipline that had once defined her performances. In 1987, she was honored as the first honorary United States Foreign Service officer, a recognition of her significant contributions. Through her work in public service, Shirley Temple redefined herself. She was no longer simply a former child star, but a respected leader and advocate. Her journey showed that even after a childhood shaped by exploitation and loss, it was possible to grow, heal, and make a meaningful impact. Shirley's later life proved that her strength extended far beyond the screen, and that her legacy was built not only on fame, but on resilience, intelligence, and service to others.